Good evening, everybody. It's Zhivan Rendev, and I'm in beautiful downtown Springvale. That's in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, Southern Hemisphere. I had to point that in case a lot of you people don't know where the Southern Hemisphere is. That's on the bottom of the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm here with my friend Mark Branov, who's in Macedonia, which is in the Northern Hemisphere. Good evening, Mark.
How you doing?
Dobro, kako si ti?
I'm all right, as good as can be under the circumstances.
And what other circumstances there, bro? The same sort of thing as the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, it's so hard to say. It's an event that really does encompass the whole world. That's the first thing that strikes all of us. Have an international Facebook or Twitter, you just see everyone talking about the same issue. Macedonia has had its own response, and it seems like every other country has come up with their responses, and there isn't a lot of similarities, except that there's plenty of fear to go around. That's for sure.
So people are afraid, like they are over here down under in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah, everybody's freaking out. I've had a few people who won't let their children in, but they have food for them left at the door.
Really?
That's fear, which is kind of strange, but I guess everybody has to look after themselves. We spoke earlier, man, and you said that they have a curfew there. They've gone that far.
Yeah, on weekdays it starts at 9 p.m. On weekends it starts at 4 p.m. With a few very minor, very small exceptions. Basically, no one is allowed to be out for any reason. So just saw your video go out for a sec.
Okay.
That's okay. The regular day is not much different. I mean, you can definitely go out. You can go to the store. You can get food, but it's spooky. It's a ghost town. There's a lot of stores that are locked up, and essentially nothing that's non-essential is working as far as I can see. People are still able to go to the stores. Some of the reports that you may have seen from overseas where there are big shortages don't seem particularly apparent. The store I've been to has been full, that kind of thing. There's a lot of intense scrutiny of the problem itself, the virus itself, its nature, and then the response of the government as well. I think that one of the differences might be just the nature of the government that exists here. I think that every society has its own level of trust in government institutions, and my impression is that the level of trust in authorities in this country has been low for a long time. So adding a crisis to that doesn't change it much. I think that one of the things that sort of strikes me a little bit is a lot of this sort of self-talk that you see. Like if you talk to the average person, they might be expressing their frustration with the virus with regards to people who aren't following the rules, who aren't following the recommendations. And in our society, I think there's a lot of this negative self-talk, like "Ovje se divi, ovje se ne poslušni," that kind of stuff. And
sound like
I just
libertarians, right?
Well, I don't know. I think that really is true. There's no doubt that some people are not following the rules, and they publish reports of how many fines were handed out. I've heard that fines can go up to 250,000 euros and a year in jail. So it's not a joke if you get caught. But then when you take a look at other societies, who's actually following the rules? Sorry?
You mentioned Canada's got a totally different approach to it. Over there,
well, yeah,
they've listed essentials and everything's essential.
Yeah, I mean, I can only go by what I've heard. Obviously, I'm not over there, but the Ontario government recently published a list of essential services that included everything anybody can imagine. So there's a bit of criticism with regards to that. I think that it's constantly changing. If anything, the response in Macedonia has been stricter, it seems. And I think that even if there weren't those rules in place, I think that that there are quite a lot of people who would have been following that idea anyway. I don't know that. I think maybe we have to take a close look at those stereotypes. I'm not really sure that they're that true.
Hmm. Well, it's
I know that
if
I know that earlier on, like when it was still kind of close to the point where they were going to declare the emergency situation. There were some kind of high-profile situations. I think the DUPA party had a Congress with hundreds of people in it, and they received a lot of criticism for that kind of thing. There's a general perception in Macedonia that the rule of law doesn't apply equally, and that some people are above the law, and there's certainly reason for people.
well, that's pretty much the case, isn't it? That
That's how it looks to me.
the rule of law over there has been the rule of, I don't know whose law, but certainly not
Well,
not law.
when Commandant Forina is the guy on the screen telling you how much he cares about you and how much he wants to take care of you, if people who have some kind of memory about who you're dealing with will interpret that kind of nonsense accordingly.
So, Mark, there's the medical the medical aspects of it, which I don't really know. We spoke earlier a little bit about it, and I don't think it's worth talking about. But if it is as serious as the alarmists say, then I guess we've got to do something about it. But I still think that we're overreacting, personally.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so many unknowns. It's hard to speak about it authoritatively, even if I were someone who had the medical background to talk about it. I think that they're in a tough situation too, with a problem that's evolving, and I've seen the talking heads on the screen in Macedonia, change their tune from day to day. There were people, basically offering occult things that they had said previously, and they're sometimes medical doctors and ministers or former ministers. So there's that aspect where you have a lot of question marks around the science of it, and then there are all of these other social and cultural aspects and political aspects as well.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. The blame game. Who is being blamed over there? Is there a whole plethora of opinions, or
depends? It seems that way. I mean, it depends who you're talking to. I think that if I were just to kind of take a look at my own social media, there seems to be more hostility towards China in Australia than there is here. I think that there is a lot of
surprise.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of experience in Macedonia with the United States and its foreign policy, so that probably will affect how people interpret things. And I think there are probably a number of cultural and historical factors for that too. But it's really just me kind of taking a guess at it. This is a country where they don't have even censuses. Forget having reliable surveys. So a census is essentially a kind of survey. It's the legal kind that democracy and elections are based on, and the governments of this country seem to think that they're not important. So if they're not important in terms of regulating an election, then I don't know why anyone would think they're important in terms of finding out what people are thinking. And on occasion you'll see some sort of survey pop up with foreign funding from some NGO connected to a foreign government, and that creates a certain amount of suspicion as well. Who knows what they're thinking? I can only go by the people that I'm in contact with, and I would say that the skepticism towards the Euro-Atlantic family, so to speak, has never been higher.
That's good. Unlike those of us from the Five Eyes, the important people in the world, we very quickly and smartly fell into line, and we're pointing at the evil people of the world. I won't name any names, Mark, but that's what's happened here, and it's very disappointing for me, especially Macedonians adopting that position. But then I've come to the conclusion that many Macedonians in the diaspora, while having a love for their people and culture, they're more in love with their lifestyle. And when they think their lifestyle is threatened by someone, they want to blame someone. And that's what's happening here. And that's very disappointing because on the one hand, they're beating their chests about how patriotic they are and how the people over there who are pro-European Union don't know what they're doing. But we were in a situation here where there is some threat to their lifestyle. Suddenly, it can't be us or our government or our system or our politicians to blame. It has to be some evil external force. Very disappointing, Mark. You would have thought by now that people have learned that to use Trump's words, our people was just as nasty as their people. And our country's been just as nasty as anyone's country, in fact, more, in my opinion.
Sometimes people choke on the three words, "I don't know." It's usually, first of all, there's a strong desire for us to have answers that explain our world, and then on top of that, there are these emotional needs that we have connected to that. So it's two things. It's not just one thing. It's not just that they want an answer and they want the answer to be accurate. That's only part of the story. The other part is they want it to correlate to whatever makes them feel good. So if you're dealing with something that's in the world of, let's say, pure science like math or something like that, where there's a clear answer, it's a different scenario. When you're dealing with political science or something that's complex like that, there's always going to be a lack of information. So then people will fill in those gaps based on their own biases, and sometimes they'll fill in those gaps based on what makes them feel better.
So let's get back to, say, the politics in Macedonia there, not the politics about the coronavirus, but how has that impacted on, let's say, people's idea of the elections, what's going to happen with the elections, and are people happy with that, that they've been put off? Do some parties think this will give them more time, or how's it going to affect the elections?
Those are some tough questions. First of all, what elections? They've canceled the election. I think that the timing of the virus crisis is quite curious in the sense that it happened after a so-called technička vlada or technical government had been formed, included a few token members from the already token opposition. They created that kind of government in order to prepare for an election that never happened. So who knows how it would have looked if things had not gone that way. Like, for example, if that bipartisanship within the ministries hadn't existed. But then you say to yourself, what isn't bipartisan with regards to the way that these major parties operate? I see quite a lot of one at a time criticisms about particular individuals, about who stole what, and scandals of different kinds, and a lot of people making hay about all of those individual situations or events. But when we talk about political origin, what are the differences between the major parties that have a stranglehold on Macedonian politics. Someone out there maybe has an answer that I don't have, but I can tell you that, you know, when it comes to strategy, it seems like everything in Macedonian politics has been some kind of waiting for Godot situation, where until you get into these special groups, these, you know, this sort of you know, rarefied air of being a member of special groups, then nothing, not only will nothing ever change, but also you can't blame anybody for anything, right? Which is what politicians love to do more than anything, is just, you know, wash their hands of responsibility. So, you know, one of the things that happened in the midst of this virus crisis is the current government, under the auspices of a illegal PRESPA agreement with a name that has not chosen by the people, was in fact rejected by the people, has somehow slipped its way into NATO. The way that they did that involved a ceremonial firing of artillery that I could hear from my apartment here. But to me, like, they're really upset that they don't have the chance to gloat over this so-called achievement. If the situation were different, maybe they would be having some sort of parties, but they're not allowed to. So they're really upset about the inability to capitalize on the propaganda aspect. What's changed, you know, from one day to the next? I don't know. I know that the country has a lot more bills to pay with regard to NATO membership, but I'm not sure what's changed. The only countries that ever threatened Macedonia in any way were NATO countries anyways.
Our neighbours, our NATO neighbours. Thanks very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking to you, man.
No problem.
I hope we can do this again. And I'm winding this up, not because I don't enjoy your company, but I'm getting, I've got about 2 minutes left on my battery.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure that we round it up properly instead of breaking down, you know. So thank you to our producer. I won't mention his name because he's a shy sort of fella. Very handsome fella. And we're going to do this, maybe in a couple of nights again.
Let's do it.
Is that fine?
Good.
And
Absolutely.
hopefully by then I will have got my act together and got some questions for you, Mark. But we'll make it conversation next time. Maybe you can ask me some questions.
Yeah, certainly.
It's a pleasure to see you, Mark. It was great having you here, bro. And
great.
Viva Macedonia.
Viva Macedonia. Talk to you later.
Thank you.